Mr. Carroll, if somebody comes through that door right now, does that mean that nobody's going to come through that door?
Sir, that's the perfect example of the problem we face. If all we do is block that door, they'll come through the next most vulnerable place, which is going to be some other way.
So of course, Coast Guard's doing its job and stopping stuff coming across the water. That doesn't have a thing to do with people coming across the border and coming across the Rio Grande River, does it?
No, sir, not one bit.
Thank you. When the president put forward a proposal, he put forward a proposal that was comprehensive, did he not?
Yes, sir.
It wasn't just about wall funding, was it?
Correct, sir.
Right. Did this Congress, led by Democrats, completely reject their duty to do what's necessary to fund the border so that the wailing and crying about what money may be taken out of one account in order to try to deal with the drug crisis, did the president not put forward a comprehensive plan that was rejected by this Congress?
He put together a very comprehensive plan. And when I'm out on the road and I'm meeting with parents who have lost a child, that's what they talk about, is how are we stopping this poison from killing our kids?
And that plan included beds, it included judges, it included dealing with the money that needs to go to Border Patrol, and dealt with all of the issues beyond just the wall, did it not?
That's correct, sir.
A question about the 90%, the points of entry number. I've got data from Border Patrol that tells me that we've collected upwards of, in this fiscal year alone, 124,000 pounds of marijuana between the ports of entry, upwards of 63,000 that through the Rio Grande Valley. I've got numbers saying 2,500 pounds of cocaine between the ports of entry, 1,500 pounds through the Rio Grande Valley. 3,100 pounds of heroin between the points of entry, 4,000 pounds of meth between the ports of entry, 112 pounds of fentanyl between the ports of entry. Does that sound like good data about what we're actually experiencing between the ports of entry right now, this fiscal year?
Yes, sir, and that's consistent with the data that I have about what's happening between the ports of entry.
Can you talk just for a second, because we've got limited time, how dangerous is fentanyl?
Fentanyl in and of itself is incredibly dangerous. It's a few grains of salt for someone who is a naive, meaning inexperienced with an opioid. Were they to ingest it, were they to succumb from it? Recently in I'm sorry, sir.
Oh, does it? Can you see this picture of a certain amount of substance relative to the size of a coin?
Yes, sir. It's a penny with a few grains next
right.
to it.
And is that amount of fentanyl, based on your experience, enough to kill a human being?
Based on purity, absolutely.
And was it true that when President Trump was at the border with Senators Cruz and Cornyn, they wouldn't even put fentanyl in the room, that Secret Service said they didn't want that as a prop because they thought it was too dangerous to be around the President of the United States?
I've heard that. I didn't participate in that conversation, but I heard the same thing.
How much fentanyl at this kind of amount, at sort of a gram or 2 grams, or milligrams, sorry, that would fit in 112 pounds of fentanyl that have been collected between the ports of entry by our own data? It's a massive amount and would kill millions of Americans. Is that correct?
In a variety of ways, including sprinkling it on drugs that people don't even know, that it's on that. In Chico, California, at the beginning of the year, people thought that they were just, snorting powder cocaine, and it had fentanyl. 14 of them, all 14 of them went down. All 14 of them overdosed, not even thinking they were taking opioid, thinking they were doing some other drug.
I appreciate that very much. I want to pivot to Mr. McDaniel, my fellow Texan, and I appreciate you being here. You said in your opening statement, and you referenced in your written statement, the importance of cartels in driving our current crisis. You agree with me that cartels are a huge driver of our current human trafficking crisis as well as opioid crisis?
Yes, sir, that's true. There's no crossing the lines. They're using the cartels to move both drugs and humans.
And you said in your written statement, cartels and transnational gangs targeted by HIDTA law enforcement initiatives are predators that exist to make money and harm the communities of our nation. My prior experience with DEA allowed me to see the inner workings of these cartels on a first-hand basis, and I do not see the difference between these cartels and many of the designated terrorist organizations also seeking the destruction of our society. My experience of talking to Border Patrol and talking to people who actually know what's going on because they spend time and live on the border instead of preening in front of cameras in Washington, those people tell me that cartels are driving the human trafficking crisis. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Profiting is the Reynosa faction of the Gulf Cartel, profiting by moving hundreds of thousands of people through the Rio Grande Valley sector.
Yes, sir. That's my experience.
And upwards of making $100 to $130 million.
Yes, sir.
Is the Cartel del Noreste of Los Zetas, are they profiting by moving people across the border?
Yes, sir. They
Is
are.
moving people across the border distracting from moving narcotics at the same time?
No, sir. It's all about money for the cartels.
And so finally, my final question on this is, do you believe that the terrorist organizations, and do you believe that my colleague Mark Green and I are correct to call on the Secretary of State to define them as foreign terrorist organizations?
Yes, sir, I would support that.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank